I always thought the cruelest words a man could hear from his own daughter were, "I don't need you anymore." Turns out, there's worse. Much worse. You're not safe alone, Dad. We've already arranged everything. The rehab center will take good care of you. The way Lisa said it, calm, practical, like she was telling me about a new grocery delivery service, made my skin crawl. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind when the autumn wind cuts sharp through the windows no matter how tight you close them. I'd just finished raking the last of the maple leaves into a neat pile in the yard. My hands still smelled of earth and gasoline from the mower. The house was warm, heavy with the scent of beef stew I'd been simmering since noon. Everything about it felt like home. My home. And then she dropped that sentence on me like a blade across the table. I stared at her, waiting for the joke, but Lisa's eyes were flat. Her husband, Brian, sat beside her, arms crossed, his cheap suit smelling of cologne too strong for a weekday. He didn't meet my gaze. That was the first sign something was rotten. "What center?" I asked, forcing my voice steady. "The Oakwood Wellness and Rehabilitation Center," Lisa replied. "It's private, top quality, 24-hour staff. You'll have your own room, activities, meals prepared. No more worrying about you forgetting your meds or leaving the stove on." I laughed once, short and sharp. I haven't left a stove on in my life. And my doctor says I'm healthier than half the men my age. Brian finally looked up, and that smug little curl of his lips told me everything. "It's not about health, Tom. It's about peace of mind. For Lisa, for me, for the family." Family. That word coming out of his mouth tasted like rust in my ears. I leaned back in my chair. The wood creaked under my weight. The same chair I'd built with my own hands 25 years ago. My wife, God rest her soul, had sewn the cushions herself. And now my daughter sat across from me, telling me I wasn't fit to sit in it anymore. Lisa reached into her purse and slid a set of documents across the table. My name was printed in bold letters on the first page. "We just need your signature, Dad. Everything else is arranged. You'll be moving in Friday." My fork clattered against the plate. The stew had gone cold. I didn't touch the papers. "What exactly am I signing?" "It's a standard care agreement," Brian cut in quickly. Too quickly. "It just allows the center to take responsibility for your well-being. Financially, everything's manageable. Don't worry about the details." I've been around long enough to know that when someone says, "Don't worry about the details," that's exactly when you should start worrying. I picked up the top page, just enough to glance at the letterhead. Oakwood Wellness. The name felt familiar, but not from any brochure. My gut twisted. I looked at Brian again, and it clicked. His new business project, the one he bragged about over beers last Christmas, pretending it was some big investment. The rehab center. He didn't just want to put me in there. He owned it. "You've got some nerve," I said, voice low. My daughter blinked like she didn't understand. Brian froze, then smirked. He knew I'd caught on. Lisa's hand trembled slightly as she reached for mine. "Dad, please. This is the best option. You can't live in this big old house forever. We're just worried about you." I pulled my hand back. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking clock on the wall. Every tick sounded like a countdown. That night, after they left with their untouched bowls of stew still steaming on the table, I sat alone in the kitchen. The papers lay in front of me, their edges sharp in the lamplight. My daughter thought she was saving me. Brian thought he was about to cash in. Monthly payments, my house on the market, insurance money funneled right back into his pocket. But they'd both forgotten something. I wasn't dead yet, and I wasn't going quietly. I walked to the living room, where my wife's old photograph still sat on the mantel. Her smile, frozen in that frame, always had a way of steadying me. "Looks like it's time to remind them who I am," I whispered. The words felt heavy in my chest, but solid, like iron. That was the night the plan started forming. The next morning, I woke before dawn, same as always. Habit never dies, even when people around you start planning your funeral while you're still breathing. The air outside carried that bite of late October, cold enough to sting, sharp enough to remind you you're alive. I brewed coffee, the strong kind, black as tar, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the stack of papers Lisa had left. Their plan was simple. Too simple. Sign here, hand over my independence, and quietly fade into the background while Brian lined his pockets with care expenses. I'd seen schemes before. Neighbors tricked into bad loans. Coworkers talked out of pensions. I'd always told myself I'd never be that fool. And here I was, their target. I pulled open the drawer where I kept old bills, tax records, insurance papers. Decades of my life stacked in yellowing folders. Brian thought I wouldn't notice details, that my eyesight was as bad as my memory. Truth was, numbers had always been my weapon. They tell stories no liar can hide. By noon, I'd already called an old buddy, Sam Hardy. We'd fought fires together back in the 70s, men who trusted each other with their lives. These days, Sam was a retired cop with more connections than he'd admit. Tom, his voice rasped through the receiver, equal parts surprise and suspicion. Need a favor, Sam. Name it. Background check. Oakwood Wellness and Rehab Center. And Brian Carter. He chuckled low. Don't tell me your son-in-law got you into one of his bright ideas. Something like that, I said. I just want to know how deep the rot goes. By evening, Sam had promised me files in a week. But I didn't have a week. Brian was moving fast. Friday, he'd said. That meant 3 days. So I played my part. I called Lisa, softened my voice, let it crack just enough. Honey, maybe you're right. Maybe I do need help. The relief in her tone almost broke me. She wanted to believe she was saving me. But her husband's shadow stood behind every word. That's wonderful, Dad, she said quickly. We'll take care of everything. You'll see, it'll be easier for all of us. I hung up and stared at the silent kitchen. Easier for them, maybe. For me, it was war. The next morning, I drove into town. My old Ford groaned down Main Street, past the bakery, the barber shop, the hardware store where everyone still knew my name. Folks nodded, waved. None of them knew my daughter was planning to ship me off like a worn-out appliance. At the library, I pulled property records on Oakwood. My fingers traced the deeds, transfers, hidden under LLC names. Took me less than an hour to find Brian's fingerprints. He wasn't just involved, he owned 30%. Enough to profit, not enough to be obvious. Slick. Too slick. That night, I laid out everything on the kitchen table. The copies, the deed, the rehab's brochures Lisa had slipped in her purse. The house was quiet, except for the ticking clock and the hum of the fridge. I could almost hear my wife's voice, steady, sharp. Don't let them take what you built, Tom. I made my first move the next day. I visited Oakwood itself. Drove out there in the afternoon, sunlight cutting through the bare trees. From the outside, it looked pleasant enough. Fresh paint, trimmed hedges, a welcoming sign with gold letters. But inside, the smell hit me first. Bleach mixed with something stale, like air that hadn't been free in years. The receptionist smiled too wide. Can I help you, sir? Yes, I said, resting my hand heavy on the counter. My family's thinking about moving me in. I watched her eyes light up at the word. A customer. A profit. She slid brochures toward me like poker cards. I took the tour. Small rooms, shared bathrooms, staff avoiding eye contact. I noticed the locks on the outside of some doors. I noticed a man in a wheelchair staring at the wall like he'd been forgotten there. And I noticed a stack of unpaid invoices sitting half-hidden on a nurse's desk. When I walked out, I knew 2 things. First, this place was a money machine, not a sanctuary. Second, if Brian thought he was clever, he had no idea what kind of fire he'd just started. That night, as the street lamps cast long shadows across my yard, I opened my notebook. Phase 1, gather proof. Phase 2, bait the trap. Phase 3, I didn't write it down. Some things you keep in your head. I closed the book, looked out the window at the cold night, and whispered to myself, Friday can't come soon enough. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the house felt louder, every gust of wind sharper. Not fear, focus. My mind kept tracing the floor plan of Oakwood, every locked door, every set of cameras I'd noticed tucked in corners. Places like that don't worry about safety. They worry about control. By sunrise, I was ready to move. I started small. Test blows, not the knockout. You don't win a fire by throwing water on the flames all at once. You contain it. You learn its shape. First stop, City Hall. I walked into the records office with my old canvas jacket and a stack of quarters for the copy machine. The clerk barely glanced at me. Good. Invisible is useful. In less than an hour, I had copies of every complaint ever filed against Oakwood. Neglect, overbilling, patients falling when staff wasn't around. Most had been buried quietly, settled, but the paper trail was there, and now I had it in my hands. Second stop, Sam. My old friend met me at a diner on Route 6, his tie loose, his face carrying more years than the last time we'd shared a beer. He slid a folder across the booth. Your son-in-law's dirty, Tom. Real dirty. That rehab's been bleeding insurance companies for years. Billing treatments that never happened. Pocketing the difference. I flipped through the photos, bank statements, names. Each page smelled of ink and betrayal. Brian's name appeared too many times to call it coincidence. Sam leaned closer. You sure you want to go through with this? Once you light this match, there's no putting it out. I stirred my coffee, watched the black swirl. Sam, I spent my life running into fires. This one, I'm not running out. That afternoon, Lisa called. Her voice was bright, too bright. Dad, Brian and I are stopping by Friday morning to take you to Oakwood. We'll help you settle in. I forced a cough into my words. Good, honey. I'll have my bag ready. She sighed, relief spilling through the line. You'll see, Dad. It's for the best. When she hung up, I set the phone down carefully. For the best for them, not for me. Thursday, I staged my own little test. I drove out to Oakwood again, but this time I didn't go inside. I parked across the street with my thermos of coffee and binoculars. An hour passed. Delivery vans came and went. Staff stepped out for smoke breaks. Then I saw him, Brian, walking through the front doors like a king checking on his castle. He shook hands with the director, slipped him an envelope so casually it made my stomach burn. That was my confirmation. Brian wasn't just an investor, he was running the show. I snapped photos, zoomed in, time-stamped. Evidence. Each click of the camera felt like another nail in the coffin he was building for himself. That night, I sat in my kitchen, photos spread like playing cards. My wife's photo watched from the mantel. I could almost hear her laugh, dry, knowing. You're enjoying this, aren't you, Tom? Maybe a little, I muttered to the empty room. Because I was. Still, part of me wavered. Lisa wasn't malicious. She was blind. She trusted her husband, thought he was building a future for both of them. She had no idea she was married to a thief. And that thought twisted me. But then I remembered the smell inside Oakwood, the blank stare of the man in the wheelchair. That place wasn't just Brian's business. It was a cage. And they wanted me in it. Friday morning, I'll admit, I played my role to perfection. When Lisa and Brian arrived, I shuffled to the door slower than usual, let my shoulders sag. Lisa's eyes softened instantly. Dad, you okay? I gave her a tired smile. Just didn't sleep well. Brian smirked like a wolf. Don't worry, Tom. You'll sleep plenty at Oakwood. I let them carry my bag to the car. Inside, I watched the road roll by, every tree and mailbox sharp in the autumn light. My heart beat steady, not fast. Calm before the storm. Oakwood loomed ahead, all clean siding and fake smiles. Brian parked, straightened his tie, and turned to me. Welcome home, Tom. I looked him straight in the eye and smiled. The kind of smile people mistake for surrender. Because in my pocket, I already had copies of his bank statements, complaints, and photos. And in my head, the first domino was ready to fall. The moment my shoes hit the linoleum floor of Oakwood, I knew I wasn't stepping into a home. I was stepping into enemy territory. The air was thick with disinfectant, but underneath it lingered something sour, loneliness, neglect, fear. Lisa busied herself with forms at the front desk. Brian leaned against the counter, already acting like he owned the place. Maybe he did. I let them think I was just an old man with nowhere else to go. But inside, I was counting cameras, exits, staff movements. Same way I'd done in burning houses years ago. Know the layout before the fire gets to you. A nurse in scrubs approached with a forced smile. Mr. Carter? We'll get you settled in. Her eyes flicked past me to Brian. The deference in her glance told me everything. He was the boss here. She wasn't welcoming me. She was obeying him. They led me down a narrow hallway to a small room with a bed pressed against the wall. No window view, just a brick wall. A single chair. A dresser with a sticky drawer. This was the comfortable environment they promised. Lisa touched my arm gently. It'll be good for you, Dad. You'll have company. Activities. No more being alone. I wanted to believe her voice, but I'd already seen too much. Her kindness was real. Her blindness was deadly. I sat on the edge of the bed, let my shoulders slump. Brian clapped his hands together. All right, Tom. Get some rest. You'll be safe here. Safe. I almost laughed. When they finally left, I lay back and stared at the ceiling. The faint buzzing of a light fixture kept time with the clock in my head. I knew I had hours, maybe days, before Brian pushed paperwork to make this arrangement permanent. That was his play. Get me signed in, then push for guardianship, then sell my house while I sat locked behind Oakwood's walls. But he'd underestimated me. At dinner, I sat with 3 other residents. None looked me in the eye. One woman picked at her food with trembling hands. Another man stared blankly into his soup. The third, a wiry fellow with sharp eyes, leaned close and whispered, "Don't trust them." I raised an eyebrow. The staff, the owners, you're just numbers to them. Insurance checks. They don't care if you rot here. He glanced at the camera in the corner and fell silent. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I watched. Listened. At 11:42, I heard a nurse mutter to another. Brian said to keep the new guy compliant. No complaints. I noted the time, the words. Evidence. By morning, I had a plan. Step 1, send word outside. I asked a nurse for a notepad, said I liked to write letters. She shrugged and handed me one. I wrote 3 lines, folded the paper, and slipped it into my pocket. At lunch, when a janitor passed my table, I caught his eye, slid the note under my tray. Old habit, make it look casual. He frowned, but curiosity won. He took it. The note was simple. Sam Hardy. Call him. Tell him Tom is inside Oakwood against his will. That was my first spark. The second came when I noticed Brian's office tucked near the staff wing. Door locked, blinds drawn, but every lock has a rhythm. I'd learned that long ago on job sites, when getting into a stuck storage shed sometimes meant knowing where to push. I didn't need to break in. I just needed to watch. Sure enough, by late afternoon, Brian strutted in with a folder under his arm. Through the narrow gap in the blinds, I saw him slide papers into a safe behind his desk. My gut told me what they were: billing records, contracts, maybe even the guardianship documents he planned to file. Proof. That evening, Lisa returned to check in. She hugged me tight, whispered, "I know it's hard, Dad, but give it a chance." She believed her words. She didn't see the chains tightening. When she left, I sat back on the bed, fists clenched. I wasn't angry at her. I was angry at him, for using her love as a weapon against me, for turning my daughter into an accomplice without her knowing. The lights clicked off at 10. The hallway quieted. My heart beat steady, calm, like it always did before I kicked a door into a burning room. Brian thought Oakwood was his fortress. He thought he'd locked me in. But he'd forgotten one thing. I don't burn quietly. By the 3rd day inside Oakwood, I'd learned its rhythm. Breakfast trays clattered at 7. Pills came at 9. The halls went quiet at noon when most residents drifted into half-sleep. Staff thought that meant no one was watching. They were wrong. At 12:17, I heard the janitor's mop bucket squeak outside my door. He slipped in without a word, dropped a folded paper by my bed, and kept moving. I opened it with careful fingers. Just 3 words. Sam got it. Relief slid through me like cold water. My message had reached the outside. Sam knew. That meant Brian's little cage wasn't as airtight as he thought. That evening, I sat in the recreation room pretending to play cards. From my chair, I had a clean view of Brian's office door. He arrived, as expected, smug and polished, shaking hands with the director before ducking inside. A nurse brought him a thick folder. Through the blinds, I caught glimpses, stamps, signatures, notary seals, guardianship papers. He was moving fast. Too fast. I needed leverage before he locked me down completely. So I made noise. At dinner, I asked loudly, "Why are you charging insurance for treatments nobody gets?" Heads turned. Staff stiffened. The director hurried over with that fake smile voice. "Mr. Carter, let's keep our conversations pleasant." "Oh, I'm pleasant," I said, my tone cutting. "But the state board might not be when they see the billing reports." It worked. The room froze. The director's hand twitched. Brian wasn't there, but I knew word would reach him before dessert. Good. Let him sweat. Later, in my room, the wiry fellow from the first night shuffled in. His name was George. He sat on the chair, glanced at the door. "You making trouble already?" "Depends who you ask." He leaned closer. "I've been here 6 months. My son signed me in. Promised it was temporary. Hasn't visited once. But I know things. You planning to burn this place down?" "Figuratively," I said. His eyes sparked. "Then I want in." George became my ally. He told me where staff kept spare keys, which nurses cut corners, what times the director left his office unattended. Every detail was tinder waiting for a spark. 2 nights later, I made my move. At 11:03, while the halls were empty, George feigned a coughing fit in the day room. The nurse rushed over, leaving her cart unlocked. I slipped from my room, silent as smoke. The master key hung on a lanyard over the cart's handle. My fingers closed around it like it had been waiting for me. I went straight to Brian's office. Heart steady, not racing. The key turned smooth. Inside, the air smelled of leather and arrogance. I moved fast. Opened drawers, snapped photos of whatever I found, billing ledgers, contracts, checks signed in Brian's scrawl. Each page was another nail in his coffin. Then the jackpot. A manila envelope stamped, guardianship petition. My name bold on top. He'd already filed the papers. In 2 weeks, a judge would declare me incapable, and Brian would have control over everything. My money, my house, even the damn dog if I still had one. I slipped the envelope into my shirt, buttoned up. Evidence wasn't enough. I needed it in the right hands. Back in my room, I hid the folder under the mattress, heart still steady. Tomorrow, I'd get it out. Morning brought the storm. Brian showed up early, his smile tight, his eyes cold. He marched into my room with Lisa trailing behind. "Tom," he said smoothly, "we need to talk." I sat up slowly. "About what? Dinner menu?" His jaw tightened. "About your behavior. Accusing staff, snooping around. If you want to stay here, you'll follow the rules." Lisa touched my shoulder. "Dad, please. Just cooperate. It'll be easier." I looked her in the eye. Easier for who? Brian's mask slipped for just a second, enough for me to see the rage underneath. He wanted me helpless, pliable. Instead, I was grinning at him, because tucked under my mattress was the proof of his fraud. And in my gut, I knew Sam was already moving outside these walls. Brian thought he had me cornered, but he'd forgotten one thing about firemen. We know how to turn smoke into a signal. The folder under my mattress was like a live grenade. Every creak of the hallway, every shadow through the glass slot of my door made me wonder if Brian had sniffed it out. He strutted through Oakwood that morning like a general inspecting his troops. But his eyes kept flicking toward my room. He knew I was up to something. He just didn't know what. At breakfast, George slid into the seat across from me, his plate untouched. "You look like hell, Tom." "Thanks. You look worse." He smirked. Then his voice dropped. "He's planning something." Heard 2 nurses whispering. Orders straight from Brian. "Keep you medicated, keep you quiet." That explained the extra pill they tried to slip into my morning cup. "A vitamin," they said. I palmed it, tucked it under my tongue, and spat it later into a napkin. They thought they could dull me down until I was too sluggish to fight. But I'd been fighting fire all my life. Smoke in the lungs, sweat in the eyes. You learn to keep moving even when the air tries to choke you. By noon, I had my chance. The janitor with the mop came back. eyes darting left and right. I pressed the manila envelope into his bucket, hidden under a rag. "Sam Hardy," I whispered. "The number's inside." He nodded once and kept rolling. That was the first serious strike. The evidence was out. Even if they locked me in a padded room, Brian's paper trail was already walking free. But I wasn't done. That night, George and I staged another distraction. He knocked over a tray in the hallway, sent soup splashing across the floor. While staff scrambled, I slipped into the records room. The shelves smelled of dust and mold. Boxes stacked to the ceiling. I scanned labels until one caught my eye. Billing 2021 to 2023. I pulled it down, my hand steady despite the weight. Inside, stacks of invoices billed to patients long dead. I stuffed a handful into my jacket, closed the box, and slid it back just as the nurse's footsteps echoed near the door. Back in my room, I spread the papers across my lap. False charges, fake treatments, signatures forged by the dozen. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was a machine chewing up the old and spitting out cash. Brian's machine. The next morning, Brian stormed into my room, Lisa behind him, pale and nervous. "Enough games, Tom," he snapped. "You're unstable. I'm filing the guardianship this week." I leaned back, hands behind my head. Funny, because the court might be interested to see those billing records. And that little envelope you keep in your safe. Lisa's head snapped toward him. "What envelope?" Brian's face drained of color. He's confused. Doesn't know what he's saying. But Lisa's eyes narrowed. Doubt had cracked through. I pressed harder. "Go look in his office, Lisa. Behind the second shelf. He's hiding more than you know." Brian's hand clamped on her arm. "We're leaving. Now." But she pulled away, staring at him with something new in her face, fear. When they left, I sat on the bed, my pulse steady as stone. I'd just shifted the battlefield. Lisa wasn't blindly loyal anymore. That night, the storm broke. 2 orderlies showed up at my door with a gurney. "Doctor's orders," one muttered. "Observation wing." Observation. That was their polite word for lockup. I didn't resist, not yet. They wheeled me down a narrow hallway into a windowless room. No clock, no chair, just a bed bolted to the floor. They left me there with a single dim bulb buzzing overhead. But I wasn't alone. I had the recorder in my pocket, switched on when the orderlies spoke. Doctor's orders. Observation wing. Their voices were crisp on tape, proof they were trying to bury me. I lay back on the hard mattress, eyes on the ceiling. They thought isolation would break me. But in the silence, all I heard was the echo of my wife's voice. "Don't let them win, Tom." I smiled to myself. Because Sam had the envelope. Because Lisa was starting to doubt. Because the fire was already spreading through Brian's perfect little empire. And because sometimes, being locked in the smallest room just gives you the clearest view of the whole damn battlefield. The walls of the observation wing pressed in like a coffin. No window, no clock, just that buzzing bulb overhead and the smell of bleach that clung to my skin. They thought they'd broken me, that by locking me in a box, I'd come out tame. But I'd been in worse boxes. Burning rooms with ceilings collapsing, cars twisted in metal and fire. This cell was nothing compared to that. And unlike back then, this time the fire was mine. Late that night, the door cracked open. George slipped inside, thin as a shadow. His face gleamed with sweat. "They don't know I swiped the key," he whispered. "You good?" "Better than they think," I said, holding up the recorder in my palm. The red light winked once. "Got their voices on tape." George grinned, all teeth. "Then let's make some noise." By morning, the noise came, more than I expected. A knock rattled the door, and when it opened, Lisa stood there, eyes wide, face pale. "Dad, why are you in here?" I looked straight at Brian, hovering behind her like a shadow with a suit. "Ask your husband." She turned on him. "Brian." He tried that slick smile. "Just a precaution. Your father was agitated. We needed to." I cut him off. "Agitated because I found the envelope you stuffed in your safe. The guardianship petition. And the billing records. You want me doped and silent so the judge signs it without a hitch." Lisa's face drained. "What petition?" Brian's mask cracked, just for a second. His jaw tightened. Lisa, don't listen. I'm listening, she snapped, louder than I'd ever heard her. Her eyes darted back to me. Do you have proof? I reached under the mattress, pulled the recorder, and pressed play. The orderlies' voices filled the room, doctor's orders. Observation wing. The sound of their laughter after locking me in. Lisa staggered back like she'd been hit. Brian lunged, snatched the recorder from my hand, and hurled it against the wall. Plastic shattered, but not before Lisa heard enough. Her eyes burned holes through him. You lied to me, she whispered. The fight had started, and for once, it wasn't just mine. 2 days later, the real explosion hit. Sam came through the front doors of Oakwood, not as a visitor, but flanked by 2 men in suits with state badges hanging from their belts. Investigators. Complaints department. From my seat in the recreation room, I watched the dominoes tumble. Staff scrambling, files being seized, computers boxed up. The director's face turned the color of milk. Brian stormed in, barking orders, but the investigators shut him down fast. Sir, step aside. Lisa was there too, standing near the wall, her face caught between fury and heartbreak. She'd seen enough to know the truth. An investigator came to me. Mr. Carter? We need to ask you some questions. Take your time, I said, steady. I've got nothing but stories. That evening, Brian finally cracked. He cornered me in the hallway, his voice a hiss. You think you've won? You think anybody's going to believe some senile old man over me? I stepped closer, close enough to smell the cologne he used to mask his fear. You built your empire on the backs of people too weak to fight back. But you picked the wrong old man this time. His face twisted. For the first time, I saw the boy underneath the slick mask, a coward. Lisa appeared at the end of the hall. Her eyes locked on him. I believed you, she said quietly. You said Dad needed help, but it was all about money. Her voice broke, then hardened. You disgust me. Brian froze, caught between us. The walls he'd built were crumbling, and he knew it. That night, lying back on the hard mattress, I felt something I hadn't in months, peace. The fight wasn't over. Tomorrow would bring hearings, paperwork, maybe even court. But the tide had turned. Brian thought Oakwood was his fortress. Instead, it had become his prison. And me? I was just waiting for the final strike. Because every fire ends the same way, with collapse. The morning after the investigators raided Oakwood, the whole place felt different. No fake cheer from the nurses. No swagger in Brian's step. Just silence and tension hanging thick as smoke. I sat at the edge of my narrow bed, staring at the brick wall outside the small window. My hands were steady. My mind was sharp. For months, they'd been treating me like I was finished, like I had nothing left but pills and pity. But today was the day I burned their lies down. At 9 sharp, 2 men in suits returned. They carried clipboards, but their presence was heavier than any paperwork. Behind them walked Sam, his badge clipped to his belt, eyes scanning the halls like a hawk. Mr. Carter, one of the investigators said, we'd like you to join us in the conference room. It concerns the guardianship petition. I stood slowly, my knees creaking but my spine straight as ever. Lead the way. The room they led me to smelled of stale coffee and panic. At the table sat the director, sweating through his collar, and Brian, his face pale, but jaw clenched like he still had control. Lisa was there too, eyes rimmed red but sharp. They slid the petition across the table toward me. Mr. Carter, your son-in-law filed this last week. It declares you mentally incompetent to manage your affairs. Before this proceeds, we'd like your statement. I looked at Brian, then at Lisa. Slowly, I pulled another envelope from my jacket. The one Sam had returned to me that morning. Inside were copies of the billing records, the forged signatures, and, most damning of all, the original guardianship papers with Brian's name scrawled at the bottom. I spread them across the table like cards in a final hand of poker. Incompetent? That's rich. The only incompetent thing here is Brian's attempt at a cover-up. Lisa leaned forward, scanning the pages. Her lips parted, trembling. You forged this? She whispered to Brian. He shot her a glare. Don't listen to him. He's confused. I cut him off, my voice sharp as broken glass. Confused enough to find your bank accounts? Confused enough to record your staff locking me away in a room with no rights, no voice? You tried to bury me, Brian. But I dug myself out, and I brought the whole damn foundation with me. Sam dropped a recorder on the table, pressed play. The orderlies' voices filled the room, clear as bells, doctor's orders. Observation wing. Keep him compliant. The director buried his face in his hands. Brian's lips moved, but no words came out. One of the investigators stood. Mr. Carter, based on this evidence, the guardianship petition is invalid. Furthermore, we are opening a criminal investigation into Oakwood Wellness and its financial practices. He turned to Brian. You'll want a lawyer. Lisa's chair scraped against the floor as she stood. You did this to him. To my father. To me. Her voice cracked, but her eyes stayed locked on Brian. We're done. She walked out, the door slamming behind her. For the first time, I saw Brian deflate. The slick mask, the arrogance, it all drained away. He looked small, weak, like the kind of man who only feels tall when he's standing on someone else's shoulders. I leaned across the table, my voice low, each word deliberate. You thought you owned me. You thought you owned this place. But the truth has teeth, Brian. And today it bit you. The days that followed moved fast. Investigators seized records, froze accounts. News vans parked outside Oakwood, reporters swarming like flies around the carcass of Brian's empire. Families came forward, furious, waving copies of bills for treatments their parents never received. I watched it all from my porch. Yes, I was back home. My house. My chair. My wife's photo back on the mantel where it belonged. Lisa came once, a week after Brian's arrest. She stood on my porch, clutching a coffee like it was a shield. Her eyes were heavy with guilt. Dad, I don't know what to say. I looked at her for a long time. She was my daughter, and she'd been blind, but she wasn't cruel. Just lost in his lies. Say nothing, I told her finally. Just remember what you saw, and never let another man use you like that again. She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks, and left without another word. Maybe one day we'd talk again. Maybe not. That night, I sat in my old recliner, a glass of water in hand. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the windows, carrying the smell of wood smoke from a neighbor's chimney. I thought about all the years I'd spent giving, money, time, sweat, believing it bought love, or at least respect. Turns out, sometimes it just makes you a target. But I wasn't a target anymore. Brian's empire was ashes. Oakwood was shutting its doors. And me? I was still here. I raised the glass toward my wife's photo. They thought I was done, Ellen. They thought I was weak. But you always knew, didn't you? The old man still got fire. I set the glass down, leaned back, and let the silence settle. For the first time in years, it felt like peace. And as the clock ticked steady in the hall, I spoke the words that would carry me to sleep. They'll never forget what happens when you try to bury me alive.